Before we start the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. And now, let's go. Story 1. I had just opened my laptop when the HR email landed in my inbox. Asterisk, your performance review is scheduled to begin. Please present yourself to Office 3 tomorrow at 8 a.m. for the calibration procedure. Asterisk calibration. The word buzzed with possibility. This wasn't just any performance review. This was the review, the yearly one that would hopefully catapult me into a senior role. Operations, perhaps. The word alone felt far more exciting than the financial spreadsheets and SQL queries I'd spent the last year working on. And my boss was from operations, a realm of decisions and action I desperately wanted to join. Just as the clock ticked past 5, he appeared in my cubicle, a wide grin splitting his face. He leaned against the fabric wall, his weight shifted slightly due to the pronounced limp in his gait, a souvenir he'd once mentioned from a hiking accident that had cost part of his leg. Well, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Big day tomorrow, huh? Don't let me down. I gave him a half smile, my gaze drawn to his company badge. An imposing black, so different from the sea of blue worn by us junior staff. I just wished I had one like that for myself. \asterisk \asterisk the big day came, and I arrived early at Office 3. It was in a part of town I'd never been to, a somewhat isolated area near the port, with not much else around. It struck me then, not for the first time, that despite the time of the job, I couldn't quite articulate what it was the company did. The specifics of our products were shrouded in secrecy. All we knew were the government contracts and sensitive technology. Security, I was told. Maybe with a promotion, the fog would finally lift. Stepping into the waiting room, marked by a large HR sign, I was met by a stern-faced secretary who simply gestured for me to sit. 3 other employees were already present. One was Emma, a sweet, young woman from IT. We'd exchanged polite nods in the hallways before. She offered me a bright smile, the first to break the tension in the room. An older man, probably in his late 50s with graying hair, sat silently nearby. I knew him from the accounting department. There was also a third person, someone I'd seen around the office, but didn't know, an engineer, I believe. He kept to himself, looking around with a similar air of unease. A knot tightened in my stomach. Were we all competing for the same promotion? The email had been vague about the process. The secretary finally rose and motioned for us to follow. We navigated a series of dim corridors until we reached a wooden door. She opened it just enough for us to pass through and tersely instructed us to step in. A shared, confused glance passed between the 4 of us before we complied. The door shut behind with a thud. The room we entered was vast, the size of a tennis court. A metal framework dominated the space, and above us, harsh lights and a half-dozen cameras were fixed. Along the side, a panel of glass stood out. My eyes focused on the glass, and I noticed something strange. On the other side, I could see my boss and other department managers I recognized. They sat in comfortable chairs, watching us. \asterisk and my boss was the first to get up to approach a computer located near the glass. He took his black badge, swiped it somewhere, and picked up a microphone attached to the console. This is a performance review and the calibration process for promotion to operations manager of the 2nd region. My position, he began, his voice amplified through the sound system. Please proceed to one of the panels. The streaming starts now. A red light illuminated on the cameras. They were recording us. In the center of the room, 4 panels were arranged in a tight circle, each screen facing inward like part of a bizarre game show. A small hole was visible in each panel, and a white circle on the floor indicated where I assumed we should stand. We approached, a wave of nervousness washing over us. No one seemed to have any idea what was going on. Please position yourselves at the white circle, my boss instructed, and we obeyed. Once the 4 of us were standing within the marked area, he continued. The process will be divided into 3 stages and may be extended until we have a selected candidate. The first stage is called screening, and it's just a form requesting your information and resume details. Please fill it out accurately, and no matter what, don't lie. On my panel, A form appeared, filled with a variety of professional and even personal questions. Are you married? What other languages do you know? What's your level in dealing with complex data? About 20 compressed questions appeared on the touchscreen, which we answered in silence. I filled it all out and tapped done. The rest of the candidates soon finished. Very good, my boss said through the microphone. Now the data will be analyzed before the next phase. We waited for about 10 anxious minutes, watching my boss check some stuff on the computer, analyzing it, and occasionally discussing something with the other department heads. Then he finally returned to the microphone. Candidate William, you were eliminated from the process for lying. We heard a thud from the side of the engineer, the one I didn't know well. He collapsed, smoke rising from his forehead, like he'd been shot. Emma let out a sharp scream of shock. The older accounting man and I remained silent, our faces drained of color. When I snapped out of it and went to try and help the engineer, I heard my boss's voice cutting through. Stop right there, he commanded, and through the glass, I saw him looking directly at me. There's a gun above your panel that's aimed directly at your head. If any of you step out of the white circle, you are terminated. Candidate William lied in his form and paid the price. It's a 100% confirmed lie based on our analysis. No cheating will be allowed in this process. My body stiffened. I stared at the hole in the terminal. There was definitely a barrel in it pointed straight at me. Now my boss continued. Let's move on to phase 2. ********** Emma was sobbing uncontrollably, her whole body trembling with fear as my boss recited the rules for the next stage. We'll proceed to company knowledge. It's a quiz to determine who truly understands the company's core principles and key results, he stated flatly, as if reading from a script. I will make 10 statements. You will have 5 seconds to answer true or false on your terminal. The one with the most incorrect answers at the end will be terminated. Before we could even process the information, he delivered the first statement. Integrity is one of our 5 principles. True or false appeared on my screen. We 3 exchanged panicked glances for a split second. Luckily, I knew this one. True, I blurted out. We all tapped our screens, and a moment later, a green confirmation flashed on mine. The next few statements came in rapid succession. Our primary client is the Department of Defense *. True, I remembered seeing that in some document. Our CEO has been with the company for over 20 years *. False, Emma got that one. Sustainability is a major focus in our operational guidelines *. False, the older man confirmed. Each time, one of us had the right answer or an educated guess to share out loud with the rest. A fragile sense of camaraderie formed amidst the fear of what would happen to the loser. Emma, though clearly terrified, tried her best to keep up, her brow furrowed in concentration. The older man remained largely quiet, his answers appearing on his screen just a fraction of a second after ours. We managed to get through 9 sentences this way, leading to 9 correct answers for the 3 of us. Finally came the 10th. Our year-over-year revenue growth was 14% last year *. A wave of uncertainty hit. I didn't recall seeing that specific figure anywhere. Emma looked lost, and the older man's face remained impassive. Then, the man suddenly declared, True. Emma, trusting his apparent certainty, quickly tapped True on her screen. My finger hovered over the options. True felt plausible, but something nagged at the back of my mind, a half-forgotten chart in a financial report. At the very last second, I realized it couldn't be 14%. It was closer to 9%. I slammed my finger down on false. I glanced at the older man. There was a flicker in his eyes, a brief, almost imperceptible glint of something that looked like satisfaction. He had known. He had deliberately given the wrong answer. The boss's voice echoed through the room. 2 candidates answered all questions correctly. Candidate Emma, with 9 correct answers, is eliminated from the process. A heavy silence descended. Emma gasped. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and then I heard it again. The thud. ********** as her body fell heavily to the floor. A surge of rage filled my chest. You can't do this. I shouted, confronting my boss in a fit of fury. He ignored my outburst and indicated that the next stage was about to begin. For a moment, I considered running to the door as fast as I could. But then I glanced back at the hole in the terminal, the reminder of how quickly the others had been killed. I turned to the older man, anger lacing my voice. Why did you give her the wrong answer? He also offered no reply, only a cold, unwavering stare. The next phase will now begin, the sound echoed. It is called sheer will, and it will test each participant's true desire for the promotion. The other managers rose from their comfortable chairs and approached the glass, their anticipation palpable, as if this were the highlight of the event. My boss typed something into the computer and swiped his badge again. This time, the panel structure lid in front of us slid open, revealing an object. It was a baseball bat. Its end was studded with spikes and nails. A deadly weapon. The rules are simple, his voice echoed. The last one standing gets the job. You may begin. I stared at the object, frozen in disbelief. When I finally registered what was going on, the older man was already charging towards me, a mix of determination and desperation in his eyes, the spiked bat raised in hand. What followed happened so fast, I can't explain it. I snatched up the bat, just as he swung his own. I raised my hand to block the blow, instinctively. The nails tore through my skin, searing pain exploding as the bat got stuck in my palm, stopping a second hit. With my other arm, gripping my own weapon, I retaliated with a single upward swing that pierced his jaw and neck. 30 seconds after my boss's announcement, the man laid on the floor with his neck open, gasping for air. I sank down beside him in shock. Then I heard the clapping. The other managers who had been watching were now cheering and applauding as if it were a sports show. The recording cameras had shifted to a lower angle, providing a gruesome close-up of me. My boss had vanished from behind the glass, but reappeared at the wooden door, limping towards me. I sat numbly on the floor, my shirt now stained with droplets of blood. As he got close, he helped me to my feet. "Kid, you did much better than I did," he said, gesturing to his leg and glancing at my mangled hand. "I'm so proud of you." My gaze kept going back to Emma's lifeless body. Then he removed his badge, the black one I had always admired, and placed it around my neck. "You'll be an incredible manager," he stated before turning and walking away. Story 2. I work a lot of side hustles, as you do to make ends meet in this economy. One of them is hosting karaoke at a local club every week. Let me be honest, I love karaoke, I love the club, but it can be a thankless job. People rushing me to have their turn next. People not responding no matter how many times I call them to the stage, including the people begging to be up next just a few minutes ago. Technical issues. You know the deal. When I showed up at 9 p.m., I was relieved that it looked to be a chill night. This means I can get a couple of songs in too. It was a fairly normal night by all measures. The usual crowd did the usual my way and Piano Man. I had the club groove to Can't Get You Out of My Head and mosh to All Signs Point to Lauderdale. It was just past midnight when a man I've never seen before walked in and started writing down his song request on one of the slips we provided. To give you more info on how karaoke works at our club, we connect YouTube to our TVs and sound systems, so we aren't limited to the roster of a specific server and can play anything with a karaoke version on YouTube, including fan-made ones for the more obscure songs and artists. I grabbed the slip once he was done, ready to place it in the pile of requests, noticing that he wrote his name down as Dis. New phone who dis? I chuckled at the thought, but seeing the song and artist name puzzled me a lot. The song name was written down as SLLDFGBJHYJBWHM, and the artist name was CBVMNTPRQ JMLYGKPZX. I looked toward Dis, who was getting a drink at the bar. All in all, he looked like a regular guy, nothing out of the ordinary. Average height, blonde hair, dark eyes, and a goatee, wearing a plain black t-shirt and faded black jeans. There was a large tattoo on his left forearm, although I couldn't make out exactly what it was in the dim light. He was meant to go up next. We prioritize people who haven't had their first turn yet, so everyone gets a chance. But I needed him to explain this. Once he had a beer in hand, I gestured him over. He seemed to expect this and walked over immediately. "You're up next. D, you want to do a song called whatever this is. And there's a band actually called this. I asked curiously. Yes, and you have to type it out exactly as I have written it down, or it won't show up in the search results, he replied matter-of-factly. By the way, these are lowercase L's, not capital I's or number ones. Oddly specific, I thought as I took extra care to spell every nonsense word exactly as he had written. I did make a mistake the first time, ending up with no search results except you might also like this videos in the suggestions. He graciously corrected that I should have typed CBVMNTPRQ instead of CBVMNTPQR. And there it was, only one search result. Even the suggestions were gone. The title of the video was written in some kind of script that I didn't recognize at all. I studied linguistics at university, so I could recognize many different writing systems, even very uncommon ones, but this was something I'd never seen before. You know those cursed text memes where writing is generated to look glitched and incomprehensible? That's the closest example I could think of, but it wasn't that either. I pointed at the screen. This one. Dis nodded. I announced his turn on the mic as he made his way to the stage. But before he did so, he had one last request for me. Make sure you stay in a box. Don't come out until my song's done. Huh, a little weird, but okay. By the way, we host from a boxed-in area that we have to step in and out of with a deck around us, kind of like a DJ's booth. Anyway, his request would probably have freaked me out more if his voice wasn't so soothing. I felt comforted despite it all. I wondered what his singing voice would sound like. At this point, the indoor space of the club was quite empty as most attendees were congregated outside, smoking and socializing. The few people inside weren't paying the singers much mind, chatting amongst themselves, cuddling their partners, ordering drinks, scrolling on their phones. That quickly changed once Dis began his performance. My confusion only increased once I hit play. The instrumentals formed a lush, sweeping pad that didn't follow the rules of tones and semitones like the majority of Western music. Sure, plenty of cultures around the world don't subscribe to the rigid confines of Western music theory. However, the chords and tonal shifts did not just sound unfamiliar, but inexplicable, as though they were not meant to be processed by the human mind. As soon as the music began, I could feel the air in the club change. The people going about their own business perked up and stared at the stage, a look of intrigue on each of their faces. People started walking inside, almost as if drawn by some magnetic force. I looked at Dis. Under the bright light of the stage, I could finally see what his tattoo was. A human body, with a pentagram wrapped around, though the lines making up the pentagram weren't perfectly straight. They were wriggly, like they were ropes or worms. And the words that escaped his lips, if you could call them words. I don't know how to describe it better, but there were consonants I'd never heard before. Vowels I'd never heard before. Sounds that no human could plausibly pronounce. Forget that. Sounds that human ears should not be capable of registering. Sounds that should not exist in this universe. I wanted to get out, but I remembered him telling me to stay in the box. More and more people poured into the club, each of them transfixed by Dis. Their individual personalities gone from their faces, all staring at the stage with the same mesmerized expression. Hypnotized, possessed even. Then the music started, rising for lack of a better word. The sounds that Dis sang intensified, and people began clawing at their stomachs. I don't remember when the first splatters of blood began, but soon enough the floor was covered. They splashed onto the walls, smeared onto the sides of the host box I stood in. A few drops got onto my skin and clothes. I had to get out now, but I could no longer move. It was as if a force field was keeping me still. I felt like screaming, but I couldn't make a sound. I felt as though I should be nauseous, but nausea could no longer physically arise within me. I could only watch and listen. Dis continued pronouncing the unpronounceable against the instrumental that was an auditory impossibility. And the audience kept going, no cries or facial expressions of pain, as if what they were doing was a normal routine. One by one, they tore through their abdominal muscles. I didn't know it was possible for humans to have the strength to do so, or it wasn't, because whatever was happening was unquestionably supernatural. One by one, they ripped out their intestines and began entangling their own guts around themselves. Gradually, they began to form shapes, pentagrams, like the tattoo on the singer's forearm. As the song came to a conclusion, the entire crowd collapsed into a heap. The faces above their horrifically mangled bodies wrapped in 5-point stars looked satisfied and serene. I fell to my knees. My head rested against the deck next to a still thick pile of song requests. His footsteps came over. I didn't want to speak, yet I had so many questions. Who is this? The phrase no longer amused me. As I sensed his gaze over me, I had no choice but to ask through trembling breaths. Who are you? I'm Pater. And why did you spare me? Because I've been looking for the right one to work with me. And it's you. Story 3. The first time I saw the waving lady was about 5 days ago. It was broad daylight, and I was at a train station on my way to work. I was already inside the train, leaving the station, when I looked out the window and saw her. She was wearing a black dress, black leather shoes, and a black medical face mask. Her long, dark, wavy hair framed her face. The moment our eyes met, she lifted her hand and waved. There were plenty of people inside the train, so I didn't think the wave was meant for me. But when I looked around, no one else seemed to react. 2 days later, I was on my way back to my flat after buying some groceries. I saw the same lady in black standing across the street. When I turned my head toward her, she lifted her hand again and waved at me. She wore a mask, and she didn't look like anyone I knew, so I quickly assumed she was waving at someone behind me. Curious, I looked around. There was no one. Not a single person. Weird, but I couldn't say she was threatening me. She was just waving from a distance. Then, just this morning, I was at my office on the second floor. My desk is right beside a window overlooking the row below. If I look down, I can see the crossing. I saw the lady in black standing there. She was wearing the same black medical mask, but her head was tilted upward, staring directly at the window beside my desk. When our eyes met, she lifted her hand and waved. I asked my coworker Kyle, who sat right beside me, if he saw the woman. His response sent chills down my spine. What woman? The crossing is empty. He wasn't joking. On separate occasions, I asked my other coworkers the same question. No one claimed to see her. All of them reacted as if I'd gone crazy, asking why I thought a woman was standing in an empty space. Shocked, I pulled out my phone and stared at it. The picture on my phone showed an empty crossing. I quickly turned my head back to the row below. I still saw her standing there, dressed in black from head to toe, even the mask. Once again, she waved at me toward the second floor of the building. The waving lady didn't appear in my phone's picture. Kyle couldn't see her either. All day at work, she stayed at the crossing. Every time I turned to look at her and our eyes met, she waved. When I left the office building that evening, I didn't see her. I took it as a good sign, but I was wrong. I hopped on the train as soon as it arrived. I was looking at my phone, scrolling through social media as I walked in and sat down. I didn't look around. The moment the train departed, I felt as though someone was staring at me, so I lifted my head. The train car I was in was empty, except for me and the lady in black. This time, she wasn't alone. There were 2 other women, wearing exactly the same black dress and black medical mask. They also had the same long, wavy, black hair. The moment I looked at them, all 3 turned their heads toward me. Seconds later, all 3 of them lifted their hands and waved at me. Fuck. I dropped my gaze to the floor, hoping nothing worse would happen. Then my phone buzzed. It was Sophia, my other friend at work. She was known for her knowledge of all things spiritual and supernatural. Kyle said you saw a woman wearing all black outside the building today. Someone he couldn't see. Sophia asked immediately. Well, I'm on a train now, and I'm seeing them, I replied. Damn. There are 3 of her now on the train. Are you still looking at them? No, I'm staring at the floor. They're creepy. Try looking at them now, Sophia said. Are there still 3? What the fuck, I muttered. What do you mean, still 3? Instinctively, I lifted my head to glance at the strange women in black. They were still there, but not 3. There were 4 of them. They were all staring at me and then waving at me at the same time. Fuck, they're 4 now, I whispered in horror. What the fuck is happening? Before I explain, Ryan, don't look away from them, Sophia warned. Why? They increase in number every time you look away and then look back. Reflexively, I turned my head again to look at them. There are 5 now. waving at me. Sophia, what the fuck is this? Sisterhood of Death, Sophia explained calmly. They are called, intentionally or unintentionally, by the people you've murdered throughout your life. Whoa, I've never murdered anyone. This doesn't always mean literally. What do you mean? If you ever treated someone terribly or bullied someone to the point they killed themselves, it's considered murder. When they cursed death upon you as they died, they called out to the Sisterhood of Death. Immediately, I thought of my high school days, things I'm not proud of. The revenge starts the day you turn 25, Sophia continued. And I know you just had your 25th birthday 5 days ago. What should I do then? I stuttered, trembling. At some point, they'll start to multiply until they match the number of people you caused to die, Sophia replied. If it's 5, they'll grow to 5 before they come and kill you. And it won't be an easy death. They'll make you die slowly, painfully. I choked. Sophia, you have to help me, I begged. How many people have you murdered in the past? She asked. I don't know, Sophia. I didn't do it with the intention to kill them. That's the excuse of all bullies, Sophia said coldly. I've heard of this happening to more people than I can count. The worst case I knew was someone who had 7. I told them to find their victims' families and ask for forgiveness. How many women in black are with you now? I looked at them and tried to count. When I had my conversation with Sophia, I completely forgot to keep my eyes on them. Subconsciously, I shifted my gaze from the sisters to my phone or the floor back and forth. I couldn't remember how many times that had happened. I lost count of how many times the sisters had multiplied. I don't know, Sophia, I said, shivering head to toe. There are a lot. 20, maybe 22. There was silence on Sophia's end for a few seconds before I heard her voice again. You evil lunatic, she said, her tone flat and expressionless. Then she hung up. Story 4. I should have died. I was driving back from a friend's house. Admittedly, it was far too late, and I was far drunker than I should have been. But with the ride home at just under 20 minutes and the expectation of an open road at 3 a.m., I figured it was worth the gamble. I wish I could give some dramatic lead-up to the crash. Honestly, though, even if I remembered what happened, it would take away from the stark reality that life is oddly anticlimactic in that way. 1 second, you're going about your day. The next, darkness. No dazzling near-death montage. No slow-motion farewell. Sometimes, things are just over. The cops and paramedics later explained that a big rig had struck me. Fortunately, I wasn't at fault, but my drunken haze had surely dulled my reflexes, preventing me from possibly lessening the impact or avoiding it altogether. I still think someone had to be looking out for me at the hospital because I never had DUI charges brought against me. I digress. After the collision, everything immediately went black. I would say I sat in darkness for a while, but it wouldn't be accurate. If anyone can think of a way to describe experiencing nothing, it was that. And then, gradually, feeling came back to my body. The world around me slowly became a white blur that eventually formed into a crisp void. It was as if the universe had blinked out of existence only to slowly reform around me in its most basic state. One where nothing had been created yet. Consciousness returned in sluggish waves. My mind strained to answer the most basic questions. Before I could even ask, where am I? I had to answer what where am I even meant. If you've ever been completely disoriented, you know how your mind scrambles to piece together reality in a desperate attempt to forge a larger, comprehensible picture. Problem is, I had no frame of reference for where I was. Even as my mind tried to catch up to my body, it searched for some kind of key to unlock the door of clarity, only to find that even in the deepest recesses of my mind, that key didn't exist. Great. I stood, and then like a lightning bolt striking some repressed chord in my brain, everything returned to me. Who I was, where I was before the darkness, and the best answers I could give to my pseudo-philosophical questions. For a moment, it was painful, so much so that it briefly sent me back down on my knees. Not just because of the shock of the moment, but because I knew something about this place was still in there. The void was warm. My previous drunkenness had gone, and I could breathe better than I ever could before. The air tasted sweet and smelled of apples. Odd. All I could see was white. No external sound was present. Testing this, I yelled, but the sound simply vanished. No hecho. My first thought was maybe I was in a dream, but using the tried and true method of trying to lightly injure myself, I found that it wasn't the case. My clothes made it to where I was, but my car keys and phone didn't. With no means of communicating with anyone, the best thing I could think to do was walk. And so I did. For how long? I couldn't even begin to tell you. The walk might have been one of the most disorientating parts of my adventure. One moment, it would feel like I had been walking for days. The next, I'd swear I had only been walking for a few minutes. The whole time, I never got tired or felt the need to eat or drink. My perception of direction warped. What felt like walking in a straight line would suddenly morph into the unsettling suspicion of endless circles or random turns. There were no landmarks to offer reassurance, just the persistent, illogical sensation of constant motion leading to nowhere. I had to stop momentarily because I could feel my brain breaking. Looking back into the white expanse, I caught a glimpse of someone mirroring my build and face, but dressed in clothes I'd never seen. I shouted for the other me and dashed over, only for the figure to vanish instantly, leaving behind a surge of alien memories. Memories of experiences I apparently had but swore I'd never lived. What the fuck was this? That was the moment I considered that I had to be in some sort of hell. Trapped forever in a silent void, doomed to go insane, surrounded by mirages and false memories. I slumped back into the nothingness, hopeful that even though I didn't need it, maybe I could try to sleep and wake up in a better place. At least one with people? Sounds? Something. I closed my eyes and attempted to drift off into sleep. It was maybe 5 minutes of relentless dark before a sound pierced the silence. A whisper. A genuine murmur in this soundless realm. The words were indistinguishable, but I didn't care. I jolted upright, straining to hear. It persisted. I ran toward the sound, using it as a radar to find its source. The louder it became, the more desperate I was to head in its direction. Countless minutes, hours, and likely days went by. My sole goal was to follow this one link back to humanity until I found them. The whisper stopped. It was silent again. The silence gave way to a disquieting scene. A vast sea of people extending infinitely into the void. Some dressed in gray robes, others wearing everyday clothes. Each was separated by about 6 to 10 feet. Every single person knelt in deep prayer. My gaze drifted upwards, mirroring the people down here. I noted countless dark lines etched against the white expanse. But my attention was soon stolen by something far more significant. Beyond the kneeling masses, a colossal form materialized on the horizon. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. But the more I walked toward it, the more I understood. It sat there. I'd estimate it was many times the size of the largest object humanity has ever built. It resembled a gargantuan brain, its silver surface slick with a viscous, translucent green slime, like a creature suspended within a gelatinous shroud. Elongated frontal lobes tapered into sharp, unsettling points. Countless tentacles extended from its body far into the distance. 2 long eye stalks protruded from the top and bent back down to watch over the praying people. It never kept its gaze in one spot for long, but it certainly had more interest in some people than others. I looked around, and everyone stayed exactly where they were, praying toward this abomination. Instinctively, I shook the closest woman next to me. I tried to scream at her that we all needed to leave. I didn't know where to go, but this obviously wasn't safe. She didn't so much as flinch when I tried. No time. I noticed I had caught the thing's attention. I moved to the next man, and I got the same response. Another one. Again, nothing. The hell is wrong with all of you? I thought. There was no possible way everyone here was entirely unaware of the looming monster. I looked up, and those stalks were already over me. They stretched down until they were mere feet from my face. It made some deep, booming, unintelligible sound that almost resembled language before its tiny pupils dilated and flashed a bright light at me. I didn't want to stick around and find out the reason for its interest. I sprinted in the other direction, pure terror, guiding my feet in a random direction. I thought that finding people would be my salvation, only to realize that everyone else who made it here had found themselves in hell. Naive as I was, I thought I could outrun the thing until I was lofted into the air. One of its many slimy tentacles had wrapped around my body and was slowly making its way up my neck and deep inside my nostrils. The black streaks closed in as I ascended into the sky. Only when we finally stopped did the horrifying truth reveal itself. They were people. Fucking people. Each was a lifeless puppet dangling from thick, invasive tentacles snaking into their nostrils. For some, apparently, that wasn't enough for the creature. It had entered through their ear canals. For others, the tendrils opted to pierce directly through their eye sockets. I didn't know if anyone there was alive or dead. All I knew was that the bodies extended into the infinite as I looked out. As above, so below, tentacles were branching off each other, constantly at work, continually bringing new people from the prayer pile into the sky with the rest of us. When I looked down, I could see some people being released, only for them to go straight back into prayer. I looked on in horror as tiny eye stalks emerged from the tentacle that had grabbed me. It looked deep into my eyes, and I could feel it reaching up my nasal cavity until it had penetrated my skull. I don't know how I didn't scream out in agony as it made contact with my brain. When it did, I assumed a horrific death wouldn't be far behind. My eyes rolled to the back of my head, but instead of liquefying my brain or pulling squishy bloody chunks out through my nose, something amazing happened. I saw a cavalcade of colors. The entire spectrum of light, shades I didn't even know existed, danced before me. Strings of numbers and alien symbols flashed among them, forming equations, and somehow I could process it all. For each second I watched this display, massive repositories of information flowed through my mind, and I began to understand more than hundreds, maybe thousands, of minds could comprehend. The numbers and colors blended together to form images I could feel. Images of me living past lives, not only as a human being, but all the way back to when we were single-celled organisms. Throughout all of time, every experience, every piece of knowledge, and every minuscule reaction to our world had been stored, and now it was all coming back. Much had changed through my experience, but there was one constant throughout it all. One force that was always guiding me beyond where I could see. More accurately, it guided us and our world in far too complex of ways for me to begin to understand, let alone relay. But one thing was clear. He had somehow built much of our experience. He somehow had been the reason we were here, and we were all always meant to come back. And the reason why became clear. He was God, not the God of the false stories they tell on our tiny little rock. No, the human mind, or at least the one we currently experience, is far too simple to understand something beyond creation, let alone even begin to conceptualize what such a being could be, or its purpose. See, we think in terms of ourselves. We believe such a being must look similar to us, think similarly to us, have goals that seem rather human. How naive. How do you explain a being that forms worlds using code and mathematics that our greatest quantum computers couldn't begin to calculate? A being that can communicate vast amounts of information through a precise showing of colors so effectively that even someone who had never seen its displays before would always understand it perfectly? A being with an absolute understanding of our universe, down to its most minute principles. This not only allows such a being the ability to predict all future events perfectly, but also allows it to adjust those principles as it sees fit. I'm sure that even the form I saw wasn't truly what it looked like. It was simply my mind's best guess as to what I was seeing. The funny thing was, as I remained suspended there, absorbing this information, it became clear that I had been there before. We all have. We have all had these revelations, and have been one of those people praying before him, hoping he would allow us to see just a fraction of what he knows, allowing for a glimpse into the infinite. Then, as abruptly as all this began, it was simply over. The void dissolved, replaced by a hospital room's stark, sterile white. Blurry shapes gradually sharpened into the mundane reality of medical equipment. My mind struggled to ask the fundamental questions of what happened and where I was. Of course, I didn't remember anything that happened. None of us do. And like everyone else, I would have moved on and gone on with the rest of my life. But recently, I've had these dreams. I call them dreams, though they feel like a continuous, unbroken experience that sometimes bleeds into the edges of my waking perception. In them, I'm back at that place, talking with the version of me I attempted to speak within the void. He tells me of my last experience there, and that time works in such a way that there's always a version of myself exploring, sometimes simultaneously. To prove it's real, I ask about things in my world, things I have no business knowing, but with the understanding that a version of me with this vast knowledge should. Every single answer given to me has turned out to be true. I don't know where I heard this from, but someone suggested that our minds are almost like radios. Under the right conditions, we can tune into specific frequencies from outside our realm of existence. I don't know if that's what's happening here, but it fits. As I walk through this place in my dreams, more comes back. Sometimes I'll lose other pieces, and I'm sure there are events I don't recognize now that will return later. In fact, I'm almost certain that, given enough time, I won't remember any of it. It's a big reason I'm writing this down now. As I talk to my other self, he explains that he has this theory that there's a reason for all of this, that he has some purpose for all of us, but needs us to reach a point where we can understand what was meant to happen. That part still keeps me awake at night, but I suppose there's something that we need to have a certain amount of knowledge to do. There's a level that each of us has to attain to even begin to communicate with him on his level, let alone become what is needed. As for me, I don't think it was my time to stop learning in this form. At the same time, I can't help but think that my going through that and relaying it to all of you was part of his plan. The truth is, I'm not the only person to speak of their experience with death. Maybe we need all of those people to talk about their experiences to really get an understanding of what we're dealing with. Just a hypothesis. Still though, the more I think about that place and my time there, the more questions I have. Honestly, it's been driving me kind of crazy, so I'm hoping that after I get this out, I'll be able to stop thinking about it for a while. I just can't shake the feeling that some bad events are coming down the pipeline, either. They always do, of course, but something says that a uniquely devastating event is coming for our species. I lost almost all of the information that flowed through me in that place, but I think something must have stuck. Some combined insight points to our world heading toward a truly awful experience. Think about it. This God never showed any signs of being particularly good or loving. Knowledgeable, yes. Yet, this same entity has overseen every mass extinction, every bombing, every act of human cruelty. The fact is, there's a lot of learning through pain. I've become more fearful, knowing what's out there, but not knowing what it desires. And yet, a good part of me still wants to go back. But that place has a grip on my mind like nothing else. I'd be lying if I said that knowledge wasn't absolutely intoxicating, far beyond anything on earth could ever be. What more did I know? What does it want with us? Sometimes I lie awake just thinking about everything it could share. These are questions that a million of us wouldn't think of asking, and the answers a billion of us are dying to know. Knowing all that knowledge is just over the edge of death, and how easy it would be to just tip over. Let myself free fall back into the void, back into a place where I can beg for that fraction of a fraction. Don't worry. I plan on living until the day I die from natural causes. But it's something I live with. And it makes me question how many people that place sticks with on some deeper level. Many of us don't even know we want to return there. Because in reality, we belong there. It's where all of us are destined to be. The one place we all know is at the end of our journey. I could go on forever with these questions, but there isn't enough time in the world to answer them. So I simply want to thank those who made it this far. You can't imagine how good it feels to get this off my chest. For those who have experienced something similar or had their own unique experiences on the other side, I'd love to hear from you as well. Please, take care of each other and yourselves. And remember, there's no need to spend too much time staring into the abyss. The abyss is already waiting for all of us. Story 5. I have been sleeping poorly. For weeks, perhaps since the house became empty and human voices vanished from its hallways. But that night was different. I dreamt something I haven't been able to forget, even though I've tried with methods more rational than poetic. Something that clung to my body like a pungent smell like a subcutaneous hum. In the dream, I was part of a hive. I wasn't observing the bees. I was one of them, but not like a human disguised as an insect, not with fake antennae or an anthropomorphized body. I was a bee in its entirety, its sensory field, its exoskeleton, its consciousness divided between individual will and collective impulse. Everything vibrated. Everything smelled. Everything moved in patterns I understood without comprehending. The hive wasn't a common honeycomb. It didn't hang from a branch or hide in a natural cavity. It was organic, yes, but also in another way. The hexagons seemed to pulse, moist, as if they were breathing. They opened and closed with a cadence reminiscent of an animal's diaphragm while asleep. The walls were covered with a warm, gelatinous substance that wasn't wax or honey, but something like flesh. And the worst, the sound. A choral hum, like thousands of thoughts stitched together, but suddenly distorted, as if something or someone was trying to speak through it. They weren't words. It felt more like an intention, a presence using the hum as a mouth. I tried to move, to fly, but the wings didn't obey. I felt a larva inside me, not literally, but as if I were incubating something, as if that hive didn't contain me, but was forming me from within. Then something changed. I began to understand the pattern of the hum, as if the pheromones crossing the air were also syntax, the language of the swarm. And what they said, what they repeated over and over, was a question directed toward a specific cell of the hive that didn't seem made to contain honey or a larva. It was a different cell, covered with black wax, as if it were charred. The other bees avoided it, but I didn't. I was drawn to it, as if it were mine, as if it belonged to me. I felt it was mine. I crawled over the surface of the honeycomb, and when I touched that cell, the hum ceased, and I heard a word, a single one. Not a name, not a verb, a word that in the dream was perfectly understandable, although now only its resonance remains, like a wet silhouette on a fogged mirror. I woke up drenched in sweat, my mouth dry, my nails dug into the palms of my hands. An invisible hum lingered behind my ears, like the echo of something that doesn't belong to the dream or wakefulness. I didn't remember that word, but everything else was fresh in my memory. I could recount it perfectly, as I'm doing now. The only thing I didn't remember, and still don't, is that word. I shook myself a bit before getting out of bed. That had been the strangest and craziest dream I'd ever had. Well, a dream I remembered. At that time, I was a biology student about to finish my degree. Only the graduation requirement remained. I had decided to work on a thesis instead of doing an internship. Why? I don't even know. If I'd taken the other option, maybe none of what happened afterward would have occurred, and I wouldn't have ended up medicated. My thesis focused on the sensory allometry of Apis mellifera, the honeybees. Hence the reason for that dream. It's not that in the realm of Morpheus, I had become an expert on bees. I was fascinated by the precision of their bodies, the way the growth of their sensory organs relates to body size. Everything could be measured, graphed, understood. I suppose I was attracted to precision itself. I lived in an old university house, in a city I prefer not to name. The walls were always damp and smelled of old books. Before the 2020 pandemic, 8 students lived there, each in their room, sharing coffee, insomnia, laughter, and existential crises. But when the quarantine began, everyone returned to their homes. Everyone had a place to go back to, except me. I stayed alone, 6 months locked in that house, surviving on delivery food and sporadic video calls. At first, solitude was a luxury. Not having to share the kitchen, the bathroom, the laundry. Not hearing doors closing or other people's footsteps. But over time, the silence mutated. It became thick like a substance. I spoke with my advisor once a week. Sometimes I exchanged messages with Alejandra, a friend from my program who was also writing from her city, with her parents, with other humans, unlike me. The rest was silence, hums, and the sound old things make when they think no one is listening. They are amid routine and isolation, the boundary between the real and the other began to blur. It all started with a file. One morning, while reviewing a fragment of the morphometric analysis of Apis mellifera worker bees, I noticed a sentence I didn't remember writing. Compound eyes are an architecture of surveillance. Each segment watches, records, and remembers. I deleted it, assuming I had copied it by mistake from some neuroethology article. But the next day, there was another new sentence. The Queen watches even when she sleeps. I decided to change the file's password, made a copy on a USB, and another in the cloud. I started reviewing the change history. Clearly, no one else had accessed the computer. I repeat, I was alone. I simply attributed everything to fatigue, loneliness, the pandemic, and the latent stress of dying and still having to pretend normality and continue with our lives, continue working on a thesis to graduate and have opportunities in the future I didn't know if it would come. However, things didn't adopt the tone of sanity despite being aware of the probable alteration of reality that my mind might be suffering. One day, a jar of honey appeared on the kitchen table. It had no label, and I hadn't ordered it. At least I didn't remember buying it. I wasn't a honey enthusiast. Sometimes I used it to sweeten the teas I drank, but now I lived 80% thanks to coffee, so it wasn't possible that I had made that purchase. The honey had a darker color than commercial honey and a slightly metallic smell. I decided to try it. Maybe it was a jar of the honey we had extracted in the lab, the one that had been gifted to the university's administrative staff and deans. Its taste was strange, like old wood. It wasn't pleasant, and I didn't know where it came from. Maybe one of the guys who lived with me had forgotten it. So I threw the jar away, but it reappeared. I remembered wrapping the jar in paper towels and throwing it in the trash can. However, the next morning, that jar was intact on the kitchen counter again. I wrote to Alejandra to tell her what was happening to me. I'd already told her about the sentences I didn't remember writing, and she, like me, attributed it to stress. But this? Alejandra, worried about my increasingly erratic messages, offered to come visit me, and I accepted with relief. She had a special permit to move around the city, since she, along with other microbiologists, was working in the university's laboratories with samples from people infected with the pandemic disease to determine if there was contagion or not. It was an offer made by our university due to the pandemic status the disease had reached worldwide. When she arrived, she hugged me as if I had been sick. "When was the last time you went out to the garden?" she asked me. "A week ago," I replied. But when we opened the back door, we found a completely different garden. Darker, with trees I didn't recognize, as if they had aged decades in a few months. That garden was completely neglected. Even when there were more people, there were only weeds acting as yellowish grass, seedlings that wouldn't get far, and even 2 trees that hadn't changed much in the time I'd been living in that house, and that had been almost 5 years. I didn't say anything, not because what I was seeing or feeling was a lie, but because Alejandra didn't. She knew that house. We had gone many times to hang out there, to drink, to read. She had even brought her dog Haru. If she didn't notice any difference, then what was happening to me? Damn stress. The last night, while Alejandra slept in my room, I went down to the improvised lab I had set up in the old library. The bees were restless, as their hum was more intense and, at the same time, more harmonious. When I approached the aquarium that was supposed to be a hive, I saw that with their bodies they had formed a precise figure, an incomplete hexagon, the same one that had appeared in the thesis in my dreams. Then something crossed my mind that maybe there was no difference between my study, my thoughts, and the hive. In my mind, there was a certainty that something had opened, something was using me to write. That's why random sentences I didn't remember thinking or writing, appeared in my documents, in my thesis draft. It had to be that. The truth is, I'm not sure if that's what really happened. Maybe it was all a symptom of confinement, of loneliness. Maybe it still is. Over time, the confinement ended. Not overnight, of course, but the authorities relaxed the measures, the university reopened gradually, and some voices returned to the hallways. Alejandra returned to the city. We saw each other one afternoon, in silence, after months of out-of-sync messages and video calls with poor connection. She asked me if I was okay, and I said yes. We both knew it was a lie, but neither wanted to correct the other. The thesis was submitted. I remember the strange weight of having it printed in my hands. sensory allometry in Apis mellifera during early larval development, and its possible relation to caste differentiation. A technical, clean, neat title. Nothing in that title alluded to the vertigo I felt while writing it, nor to the paranoia that grew like mold between the folds of confinement. The defense was virtual. They congratulated me, and I remember one of the jurors used the word solid. Everything was solid, firm, scientific, rational. And yet, when I hung up the call, I felt a cold shiver down my back, as if someone had been listening from another room, like that feeling of being watched. Days later, one morning without dates or sense, I couldn't get out of bed. I spent nearly 2 weeks shut in again, this time without a pandemic, without a thesis, without excuses. It was Alejandra who found me and took me to the hospital. I was diagnosed with mixed anxiety-depressive disorder. The psychiatrist explained everything with professional calm. Prolonged isolation, academic stress, sleep deprivation, possible genetic predisposition. She prescribed anxiolytics, antidepressants, and a mild hypnotic to help me sleep. Since then, that chemical combination has been with me. Some days I forget who I was before. Other days, I prefer not to remember. I never worked with bees again. I tried a couple of times at the beginning. I visited an apiary with a colleague, more out of politeness than genuine interest. But the buzzing, that buzzing, not the one from real bees, but the other one, lower, more intimate, the one that doesn't travel through the air, but inside the skull. That one is still there. I gave up the experiments. I left sensory entomology. I requested a transfer. Now I teach molecular and cell biology at the same university. The students listen attentively, and some even ask why I never talk about hymenopterans, bees, wasps, ants, since it's the field I graduated from. I just smile and change the subject. Sometimes, not always, but on some nights, when sleep evades me, even with the help of the pills, the buzzing returns. Not as an actual sound, more like a presence, a mental frequency. It's there when silence is absolute, when my breathing sounds louder than it should, when the darkness feels thicker than usual. And then I remember the living hive, the cell sealed with black wax, the buzzing that spoke, the buzzing with a mouth. Sometimes I think I hear that shapeless word again, the one revealed to me in dreams and forgotten upon waking. Or maybe I didn't forget it. Maybe I'm just incubating it. Story 6. I've always felt profoundly relieved to put that burning city behind me. Move past the death and destruction. Divide myself from the ash and the ruins, the rust-colored clouds and the blood-orange sky. Out of sight, out of mind. Towering steel doors swung shut as I stepped into the gallery. I sighed, allowing my shoulders to sag as I slowly twisted my neck. Left to right, right to left. The A-Au-C hummed, and its crisp, mechanical breath crawled over my exposed skin. My body cooled. The muscles in my neck began to unwind. This was my sanctuary, the last building standing. A great marble raft drifting above an ocean of rubble. I couldn't let myself completely relax, though. Yes, the gallery was safer than the inferno outside its walls. Much safer, but came with its own risks. Because it wasn't just my sanctuary. I shared the refuge with one other person. Unlike me, she never seemed to leave. She usually wasn't visible when I entered, but she was always there. If I couldn't see her, that meant she was in the walls. If she was in the walls, she'd be knocking her forehead against the marble. She didn't have any knuckles, so the woman made her skull an instrument. Same pattern every time, measured and deliberate. Tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap. The knocks were gentle, but the sound carried generously through the cavernous studio floor. It was a single box-shaped room with 30-foot-tall ceilings and not a lot in between. Each wall held a few paintings from artists of no renown. There was a spiral staircase in the center, but the 68 metal steps led to nowhere, abruptly stopping 2/3 of the way up. And most cryptically, there was the elevator, directly across from the entrance. No buttons to call the damn thing. The outline of a down arrow above the doors I'd never seen flash. No one ever came out, and I knew no one ever would, either. The elevator was a one-way trip, constructed for me alone. Wasn't ever sure how I knew that fact, but I'd bet my life on its truthfulness 20 times over. So, there I'd be, by myself on the gallery floor, that snake of a woman slithering through its walls, surrounded by an empty, burning city for miles in every direction. It would always start with me approaching the massive steel doors, waves of heat galloping over my back, but when it would end was variable. It could take minutes, it could take hours. On rare occasions, it could take days or weeks. Eventually, though, I'd wake up, the same inscrutable dream, every night without fail, for over 15 years. A transmission from the depths of a hollow reality that I never understood until last night. Tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, backslash, my birth asterisk. Ever since I can remember, I fell out of place. An outsider among my own species. I'm sure a lot of people experience a similar pariahhood, and I obviously can't confirm my lived experience is distinct or extraordinary in comparison. Let me provide an example, some objective proof of my otherness. As soon as I drew a first breath, my mother's heart stopped. Spontaneous cardiac arrest, no rhyme or reason. An unceremonious end, like the death of an old car battery. The medical team leapt into action. A few does of 4 adrenaline later, the muscle wearily returned to duty. But the moment her heart restarted, mine then stopped. Then they'd resuscitate me, only to have my mother die again. So on and so on. The way my dad used to tell it. The doctors became incrementally more unnerved and bewildered each time we flipped. Life was a zero-sum game in that operating room. It was either me or her, and there was nothing they could do to change that. An unshakable declaration from God, or the Reaper, or whatever unknowable divinity would be in charge of such an edict. The uncanny tug-of-war would have probably been amusing to witness if the implications weren't so deeply tragic. 3 or 4 cycles later, my mother's heart gave out completely, obstinately refused to beat, no matter what the medical team did. Dad would sometimes theorize that was an active decision made by the doctors that handled her care, even if they didn't have the balls to admit it. Like once they realized that one of us was dying, they arbitrarily awarded me with life. Started covertly injecting saline into my mother's veins instead of adrenaline or something. I doubt that last part actually happened. The circumstances were just viciously unfair, and that type of thing is fertile soil for growing conspiracy. Regardless, I felt his pain. See, that's the rub. Although I've always felt like an outsider, that doesn't mean I've lacked empathy. I have reverence for the people around me. I've just never felt connected to any of them. I'm like a naturalist living alone in the jungle. I love the flora and the fauna. I respect the miracle that nature represents. But at the end of the day, I'm still alone. Which brings me to Anthony. Backslash, my childhood asterisk, I experienced a fair amount of bullying as a kid. Probably became a target on account of my quiet nature and my social isolation. A lone gazelle, straying too far from the safety of the herd. They didn't scare me much, though. I just couldn't see them as predators. More like flies buzzing around my head. Noisy and a smidge irritating, but ultimately harmless. That was the problem. They wanted to feel like predators, and I wasn't providing the sensation. Inciting fear and misery made them feel in control. So, when they couldn't get a rise out of me with their routine arsenal of schoolyard mockery, things escalated. And every time a new prank was enacted, a carton of milk spilled over my head, a few spiders dumped into my backpack, etc., I would notice Anthony watching from the sidelines, livid on my behalf. Tall for his age, frizzy black hair, blue eyes boiling over with anger behind a pair of thick square glasses. One afternoon, Austin, a dumber and more violent breed of bully, became fed up with my relative disinterest. Decided to take the torment up a notch. He snuck up behind me while I was eating lunch, stuck a meaty claw into my bun, and yanked a thick chunk of hair from my scalp. That was certainly my line in the sand. It was Anthony's too, apparently. I spun around. Before he could even gloat, I lunged forward, opened my jaw, and bit down hard on his nearest elbow. At the same time, Anthony had been running up behind him with a metal lunch tray arched over his shoulder. The shiny rectangle connected to Austin's temple with a loud clatter, almost like the ringing of a gong. It was a real 1-2 punch. An hour later, Anthony and I had our first conversation outside the principal's office, both waiting to be interrogated. I've never been quite comfortable with the way he looked at me, even back then. His grin was too wide, his focus too intense. On the surface, it was an affectionate expression, but there was something dark looming behind it all, a possessiveness, a smoldering infatuation that bordered on obsession. I tried to ignore it because I genuinely did like him. As a friend, he was the only one I felt comfortable confiding in, the only person who knew of the gallery and the burning city other than myself. Now, there's no one else. This post is designed to fix that. / the gallery *I'd conquers the Tyrandos, * was my favorite. The first word is pronounced ide, I think. It wasn't the largest painting in the gallery, nor was it the most technically impressive. There was just something bewitching about the piece, though. I found myself hopelessly magnetized to it for hours every night. 1 foot long, about half a foot tall, with a frame composed of small, alternating suns and moons carved into the wood. It depicted a single-armed Valkyrie with white wings and dull gray armor, lying on her back under the shade of a willow tree. A creature with the body of a man and the head of a stag is descending on her. Its face is contorted into a vicious snarl, arms outstretched with violent intent. The beast seems unaware of the serrated dagger in the Valkyrie's singular hand, tinting the skin on the right side of its neck, about to draw blood. Oil paint lended the scene a striking vibrancy. The grass appeared lush, almost palpable. The hair on the beast's knuckles looked matted and dense, like it was overflowing with grease. Studying that canvas made me feel alive, more than I've ever felt in the waking world, honestly. However, that invigoration would fade into unease the moment my eyes landed on the 2 black holes above the Valkyrie's head, because they weren't some bizarre artistic choice. They were holes, literally. Every painting in the gallery had a pair of them. She liked to watch me look at the paintings every so often. When she did, 2 bloodshot eyes would intensely monitor my gaze through the holes. Sometimes she'd watch for so long without blinking that tears would drip down the length of the piece. Eventually, the frame would tremble with her message. Asterisk top, pausa asterisk top top top, pausa asterisk top 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 top, pausa asterisk top top bokstreck, asterisk Maya listens, asterisk what is the whole... Just do it already, * 17-year-old me proclaimed, unafraid and defiant. The man in the ski mask tilted his head. His glare dissipated. I stepped closer. The employee behind the counter stopped pulling bills from the register, eyes wide with disbelief. * Quinn, what the fuck are you doing? * Anthony hissed, cowering behind a nearby rack of chips. I sniffed the air, ran my fingers along the countertop while licking my lips, surveyed my surroundings by turning my head, and perked my ears for unusual sounds. Smell, touch, taste, sight, hearing. I resampled them all. Everything was as it should be. I felt my confidence balloon further. * I'll do it, bitch, I'll shoot. I ain't afraid. I'll splatter your guts across the fucking floor. * The would-be criminal stuttered. I stepped even closer. Close enough that the barrel of his pistol began digging into my chest. Yeah, I heard you the first time, man. I smiled, baring my teeth. So do it then. Look, I'm making it easy for you. Don't even have to aim. Like the flick of a switch, his demeanor changed. The gunman's bravado collapsed in on itself, falling apart like papier-mâché in the rain. Without saying another word, he sprinted from that CVS and disappeared into the night. I flipped around so I could face Anthony, closed my eyes, and took an exaggerated bow. He wasn't applauding. Neither was the flabbergasted kid behind the cash register, for that matter. But I sure as shit pretended they were. I was damn proud of my little parlor trick. Later that night, though, I'd ruined the magic. Anthony was insistent, just wouldn't let it go. He wore me down. So, I told him that I didn't experience any synesthesia. That meant we were safe. No one in that convenience store was going to die. My performance was just a logical extrapolation of that arcane knowledge. No one was going to die relatively soon anyway. / My first dream of the burning city and the gallery came the night of my 11th birthday. My ability to sense approaching death came soon after. Synesthesia, for those of you unaware, is a neurological condition where the stimulation of one sense becomes involuntarily translated into the language of another sense. But that probably sounds like a bunch of medical blather, so let me provide you with a few examples. The man tasted loud. The apple felt bright. The musical note sounded purple. You get the idea. It's like nerves getting their wires crossed. For a whole year before his death, my grandfather looked salty. His apartment smelled quiet. His voice sounded circular. And all of those queer sensations only became more intense as his expiration date approached. I eventually picked up on the pattern. Once I grasped the bounds of my extrasensory insight, death lost its hold over me. You see, death draws a lot of its power from anticipation. People don't like surprises, especially shitty ones. Nobody wants to be startled by the proverbial monster under the bed. I, however, had become liberated. I could feel death's advance from miles away. Therefore, I had nothing to fear. Nothing at all. At least, that's what I used to believe when I was young and dumb. Unfortunately, there are two major flaws in my supposed invulnerability that I completely swept under the rug. You may be shouting them at your computer screen already. 1. Just because I could sense death didn't mean I was shielded from the tragedies of life. 2. I didn't know for certain that I could sense everyone's death. There's one person in particular who would be unverifiable by definition. How could I be sure that I was capable of sensing my own death coming if I had never died before? The gallery asterisk the night of my 12th birthday. She revealed herself. She finally came out. There was a crack aside the elevator, no larger than the size of a volleyball. It was impossible to see what lay beyond that crack. Its darkness was impenetrable. The woman wriggled out of that darkness and slithered towards me. She had somehow been reduced to just a head with a spinal cord lagging behind it, acting as her tail. Her movements were distinctly reptilian, rows of vertebrae swinging side to side, creating U-shaped waves of rattling bones as she glided across the marble floor. I couldn't see her face until she was only a few feet away. Long, unkempt strands of gray hair obscured her features, wreathing them behind a layer of silver filaments like the blinds on a window. There was a crater at the center of her forehead. A quarter-sized circle of her skull had been completely pulverized from the incessant knocking. She twirled around my leg, spiraling up my torso until she was high enough to drape her spinal cord over my shoulders. Then, we were face to face, and she spoke the only 8 words I've ever heard spill from her withered lips until last night. Are you ready to see what is asterisk below? Asterisk, I shook my head. She looked disappointed. Then I woke up. 365 days later, she'd wriggle out from the crack again to ask me the same question. Year after year after year. My early 20s. In order for you to understand what transpired over the last 24 hours, I need to explain me and Anthony's falling out. The summer before I went away to college, he arrived at my doorstep and professed that he was in love with me. Had been for a long time, apparently. His speech laid out all the gory details. How he believed we were soulmates, how perfect our children were going to be, how honored he was to get to die by my side. Note the language. It wasn't that he believed we could be soulmates or that our children could be perfect. No, that phrasing was much too indefinite. From his perspective, our future was already sealed, written in the stars whether I liked it or not. I tried to ease him back to reality gently, reiterated the same talking points I'd harped on since he hit puberty. Romantic love wasn't in the cards for me. I was incapable of experiencing that level of connection with anyone. It had nothing to do with the value of him as a person or as a potential mate. My rejection wasn't a judgment. He wouldn't hear it. Instead, he accused me of being a stuck-up bitch through bouts of rage-tinted sobs. I was going to college, and he was staying in our hometown to take a job at his father's factory. That must be it, he realized out loud. I didn't feel like he was good enough for me. He lacked prestige. I think I responded to those accusations with something along the lines of, listen, Anthony, I don't think I'm better than you. It's not like that at all. We're just different. Fundamentally different. I'm sorry, But that's never going to change either. Not for you and not for anyone else. Asterisk in retrospect, maybe I could have selected cleaner verbiage. In the heat of the moment, I don't think he took the words as I intended. From there, Anthony hurled a chair through my house's living room window, stomped out the front door, and exited my life for a little over 5 years. Current day, fast forward to last week. I returned to my hometown from my apartment in the city due to the death of my father, something I began feeling inklings of 2 years ahead of time. After the funeral, I focused on getting his estate in order, only venturing down on a main street once in the 7 days I've been here. The coffee machine broke, and I was in dire straits. And who do I just so happen to run into? Anthony. Honestly, I barely recognized him. He was no longer sporting a lanky frame, frizzy black hair, and thick bottle cap glasses. His body was muscular, almost Herculean. He slicked his hair back, varnishing it with some hideously pungent, over-the-counter male beauty product. He no longer wore glasses now that he was able to afford a LASIK procedure, cured his short-sightedness for good. I couldn't detect the same darkness behind his eyes anymore, but that wasn't because something purged it from his system. He just got more proficient at hiding it. Last night, we went out for dinner and a drink. Platonically, I made that exceptionally transparent from the get-go. He teased me in response, inquiring whether my boyfriend in the city would come kick the shit out of him if he heard I was out with an old flame. For what felt like the millionth time, I explained to Anthony that I wasn't interested in that type of connection. Thus, I was single. That made him smile. Inevitably, he invited me back to his apartment. He was very proud of his lucrative new position in his company and the luxuries that came with it, and he wanted to show off. I almost reminded him that it wasn't his company. It was his father's company. To avoid conflict, I held my tongue. It might sound insane that I agreed to his invitation. Like I said, he concealed his darkness well. Anthony may have grown up to be a bit of a tool, but he was still the only person I ever felt close with. I was genuinely interested in seeing how his life had turned out. I wasn't experiencing any synesthesia around him, either. To me, that indicated relative safety. No one was going to die. If he tried something lecherous, an act of depravity that may not necessarily inflict death, well, that's what pepper spray is for. Anthony lived in a 2-story brick row home on the outskirts of town. I walked in the door and was greeted by a tiny entrance nook followed by an extensive set of stairs, which led up to his ostentatious foyer/entertainment room. I won't lie, it was impressive. That was the point, I think. His home was just a big, glossy distraction. Something to keep your attention away from the bedeviled man who lurked within. Barely even noticed him tapping on some home security dashboard to the right of the front door. I do remember hearing the heavy click of a motorized lock, though. At that point, I was already walking up the stairs. For the next hour, we sat across from each on a massive leather sectional in his foyer, chit-chatting over an additional glass of wine. Eventually, though, enough was enough. I think he sensed I was preparing to excuse myself and go home, because he leaned over, grabbed one of 5 stout candles off of the coffee table, and began lighting the wick with a box of matches he pulled from his blazer pocket. I told Anthony it was getting late, and that it was time for me to leave. He didn't say anything. He didn't react to the sentence at all. He just kept silently lighting the candles. When I witnessed the reflection of the burning wick in his eyes, I realized I had made a mistake. Fine, I thought. I don't need his permission to leave. He didn't say anything as I darted past him, jogging down the stairs. I pulled the knob to the front door. It didn't budge. There wasn't any obvious way to unlock it, either. Anthony? Can you kindly help me unlock the front door? I called up, experiencing terror for the first time in years. A voracious chill eating its way through my chest. Nothing. No response. Not a peep. Instead, the lights clicked off. I felt a lump grow in the back of my throat. Sweat poured over my temples. I perked my ears. No footfalls. No sound. No synesthesias. Just darkness oozing down that silent corridor. A lurching tidal wave of black, tar moments away from swallowing me whole. I reached into my purse for my cell phone. Then, furious movement down the stairs. The sound of heavy boots stomping on hardwood filled my ears. Before I could react, he was looming over me. An open hand exploded out from the shadows, and hooked onto my blouse collar. With one forceful pull, he yanked me to the ground. The bridge of my nose crashed into the edge of the stair as I fell. Electric pain writhed and crackled over my sinuses. My mouth felt hot and boggy as he lugged me back up to the foyer. Anthony quickly pinned my body to the floor in front of the coffee table. I thrashed and struggled, but it wasn't much use. He had positioned one muscular knee on each of my elbows. I was trapped. Without uttering a word, he wrapped his meaty claws around my neck and squeezed. The veins in his head pulsed, his face swollen with fury. I started to see double. Consciousness liquefied and slipped through my fingertips. I closed my eyes. With the last few grains of life I had left, I thought of my favorite painting. *I'd conquers the Tyrandos. I wanted to die with its beauty graffitied on the inside my skull. Unexpectedly, there was the tearing of flesh and a soggy gurgle, followed by a few sputtering coughs. Anthony's hands released. Oxygen rushed into my starved lungs. I opened my eyes. A serrated dagger had been plunged into the soft flesh of his neck, skewering it completely. I saw a bit of the blade poking through on the other side. Dewdrops of blood and plasma seeped from the fatal wound, trickling over his collarbone and dripping onto my blouse. The scent of iron quickly coated the interior of my broken nose. A hand still tightly gripped the dagger's handle, but Anthony's heavy knees had never left my elbows. It wasn't mine, but it came from me. I traced the ethereal limb from the knife to the center of my rib cage, where it had sprouted, and as swiftly as it appeared, the limb and dagger vanished. Before Anthony collapsed on top of me, I used my freed hands to push him off and to the side. He fell, hitting the coffee table as he tumbled. The resulting collision sent 5 burning candles crashing onto a large cotton blanket nearby. His foyer became a bonfire. I stood up, still weak and woozy from the prolonged suffocation. The sofa had caught flame too. Harsh black smoke began to diffuse throughout the apartment. I raced down the stairs once again, but I reached a similar impasse. The door remained mechanically locked. I screamed, cried out for someone to hear me, twisted the knob so hard that it tore the skin on my right palm. All the while, a conflagration bloomed behind me. I shifted my attention to the digital security dashboard beside the door. I pushed my fingers against the keyboard. The device whirred to life. For asterisk stood in my way. A PIN number was required to get to the home screen. I tried my birthday, 2 digits for the month, 2 digits for the year. Incorrect. A warning on the screen read 2 attempts left. I tried Anthony's birthday. Nothing. 1 attempt left. My panic intensified, reaching a fever pitch in tandem with the ravenous flames 1 floor above. Then I heard it. At least I think I heard it. Maybe my mind just clicked into place, and the realization was so profound that it felt like the noise began physically swirling around me. Yet I distinctly remember hearing the knocking from within the wall, directly behind my head. Tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap. I held my breath. 1-3-4-2. The screen opened. I clicked unlock, twisted the knob, pushed my body against the door, and spilled out onto the street. The gallery asterisk when I arrived last night, a few hours after Anthony died. Something was different. The woman slithered out from the crack and started moving towards me. I met her halfway, next to the spiral stairs. She grinned at me from the floor. For the first time, I asked her a question. Asterisk. Why could I not sense that Anthony was going to die? Asterisk, she glided up my leg, draping her spine over my shoulders so she could be eye to eye with me. When she spoke, her sentences lacked the 1-3-4-2 rhythmic structure I'd come to know her by. Her voice was high-pitched and raspy, and her mouth didn't actually move when she talked. She just kept it ajar and the words flowed out. Because he was never supposed to die last night. You asterisk were supposed to die last night. That's what was written. You can't foretell something that's never been written. Asterisk, her grin became sharper at the corners of her mouth, rapturous and grim. Asterisk, but I intervened. You never get to the gallery unless I did something about it. Took a lot of work and planning, but I did it. Asterisk, we asterisk did it. Asterisk, then it was her turn to ask me something. Asterisk, are you ready to see what's below? Asterisk, I nodded. Immediately, the down arrow above the elevator lit up bright red, and a chiming sound echoed through the gallery. The doors opened, and I gasped. There was the headless body of a woman standing motionless inside the elevator, wearing a silver cocktail dress with the edges of a bloody hospital gown peeking out from underneath. She held a balloon in her hand. The side of it read asterisk happy birthday, asterisk in a rainbow of colors. The woman's head and her spine slithered ahead of me. It scaled the decapitated body and inserted its tail into the dry flesh between the body's collarbones until the head was snugly attached. I walked over and stepped in. The inside glistened, polished, and reflective like a mirror. For the first time, I saw myself as I was within the gallery. I'd always assumed I was the same age in the waking world that I was in the dreams. But I wasn't. I was much, much older, and that revelation really got me thinking. Maybe the gallery has never been a dream. Maybe it's been more of a premonition, a vision of the future, the sight of a colossal marble coffin towering above the ruins of an ever-burning city, an altar to the new gods of a new age. The woman's newly fastened head turned to me and whispered, asterisk, if you wake up before we get there, that's okay. You're finally safe. We could try again every night without fear. Eventually, with enough practice, you'll make it over the apotheotic threshold. We can bring this all to fruition, my love, my single-arm Valkyrie, my deep red moon. Asterisk, asterisk, my one and only daughter. Asterisk, then, I woke up. https://www.reddit.com/r/unalloyed That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.